Ever notice how certain things, they just hit different? Not regular, everyday different, but like deeply meaningful, almost, I don't know, set apart.
Yeah.
Well, that feeling, that's what we're diving into today, that whole idea of the sacred. And we're using excerpts from Roger Caillois' book, Man in the Sacred, to guide us.
What Caillois really gets at is this. Every culture, it seems, has a sense of the sacred.
Hmm.
But get this, what that actually means. Wildly different depending on where you are, who you ask.
Right. Like imagine you accidentally bump into a king, just little brush past. Some cultures, that's it, you're done for, death sentence.
Oh, wow.
But then other places, the king himself, he's the one in trouble, suddenly he's been tainted. All because of this accidental touch.
It really makes you realize how relative the whole idea of pure or sacred really is.
Oh. So what you're saying is there's no like universal checklist. This is holy, this is not, it's all relative.
Exactly. Kiowa, he'd say sacred and profane. They're not like fixed opposites. They define each other.
Okay, so like two sides of the same coin.
You got it.
Mhm.
And here's where it gets even more interesting. Kiowa noticed that often the really pure sacred stuff, it's kept away from everyday life, almost like they're trying to protect its power or something.
Oh, interesting.
Think about a king's robes, those super fancy ones. They're only worn on special occasions. The rest of the time, locked away.
That's so true. And it's funny, I feel like some people do that even with their most prized possessions, right?
I can see that.
Like tuck away the really special stuff, almost like it's too good for daily use.
It's like using it would somehow diminish its value. And that separation, making something taboo, that's part of what makes it sacred.
So it's not just about the object itself, but its place in our lives, right? Kept separate from the ordinary. But it's not just objects, is it? Kiowa also talks about how this sacred separation, it even shows up in the way cities are designed.
Right. He noticed that places of power, like temples, palaces, government buildings, they were often in the heart of the city, surrounded by impressive architecture, often bathed in light, even at night.
Oh, totally. The whole bright lights, big city effect.
Exactly.
But those places, they can also feel untouchable, like they exist on a whole other level.
Totally. And then contrast that with areas associated with the less, shall we say, pure aspects of life, poverty, crime, even just death. They tend to get pushed to the outskirts, hidden in the shadows.
It makes you think about your own city, right? Where do you get that feeling of grandeur, of importance? And then where are those places that feel, I don't know, a little more hidden, maybe even a little sketchy after dark? Kaiwa would say those divisions, they often come from these ancient ideas about what spaces are pure versus impure.
Yeah, and it's not just about the physical space. This whole separation, it plays out in the rhythm of social life, too.
Yeah.
Caillois says festivals, with all their chaos and celebration, they're actually a deliberate counterpoint to the order and routine of everyday life.
So we're going from city planning to party time now. I like where this is going. But seriously, tell me more about this whole festival chaos connection.
Well, think about it. Festivals, they disrupt everything. Normal routines, gone. Rules, bent or broken. You're feasting when you normally fast, dancing in the streets. People even wear masks and costumes. Like they're trying to blur who they even are.
It's that whole anything goes energy that makes festivals so exciting. But you're saying there's more to it than that.
Way more. Kawa theorized that these periods of disorder, they're actually a way for societies to symbolically return to a time before order, like back to the primal chaos of creation.
Now, that's a really interesting thought. Why would any culture want to revisit chaos like that, especially in such a structured way? It seemed kind of counterintuitive.
Because, like Kaiwa argued, creation itself, it comes from chaos.
Yeah.
Think about the Big Bang, this massive explosion of energy, and then eventually order arises, structure, life itself.
So by returning to chaos, even symbolically, it's almost like they're trying to tap back into that raw creative power. But how does that actually play out in these festivals? What do they actually do?
Okay, well, this is where things get really interesting. Kaiwa, he gives some pretty wild examples of cultures that actually have rituals where they violate their taboos, especially around things like food and sex.
Wait, hold on. Breaking the rules is part of the plan, like officially?
According to Kaiwa, yeah. And it's not just a free-for-all either. These violations, they're often very ritualized, with their own specific rules and beliefs around them.
So it's not that they're actually undermining their values. It's more like these violations are essential for maintaining some kind of balance.
Exactly. It's like a pressure valve, a way to acknowledge those primal forces without letting them, take over completely.
Okay, I think I see where you're going with this. You've got this constant tension order, chaos, sacred, profane, and festivals with all their rule breaking and revelry, they're actually a way to acknowledge that tension, maybe even harness it in a way. But where does something like sex fit into all of this? I mean, we're talking about something deeply personal, primal even. How does the idea of the sacred apply to that?
And that's where Caillois' work gets super relevant, but also, a little more delicate to dig into. He gives examples where sex, can you believe this? It's seen as both a source of defilement and a tool for purification. Get this sometimes in the same
Oh,
ritual.
whoa, talk about mixed signals. How does that even work? That just seems like a paradox.
It all goes back to that idea of the sacred. It's powerful, but it's also ambivalent. So in some rituals, sex, it's this thing that needs to be contained, controlled, even purified. For example, Kaiwa talks about these rituals where couples, they engage in sexual acts, but they deliberately stop short. No completion.
So it's like they're trying to neutralize the power of it, keep it from messing with the established order. So not that sex is bad inherently, but that its power needs to be, I don't know, carefully managed.
Exactly. And here's the flip side. In other rituals, that same sexual energy, it's seen as totally essential for renewal, for fertility, even for driving away evil. Kwan describes rituals where sex, it's performed to bring about a good harvest or to purify a community after, say, a period of mourning.
Wow. So it really is all about context. Sex can be sacred or profane, purifying or defiling, all depending on the specific ritual and the beliefs behind it. That really challenges how we think about these things today.
It's amazing, isn't it, how these cultures view something like sex, something we often think of as so personal in such different ways. It really shows how much our upbringing shapes our perspectives.
Absolutely. And, Kaiwa, he's not trying to say one view is right or wrong. He's just trying to help us see how these practices reflect really deep beliefs about the universe, about where humans fit into it all.
Makes you wonder what someone from a totally different background would think about our culture, right? What they'd find strange, shocking even. Interesting point. And, you mentioned earlier that feeling of wanting to protect something precious by keeping it separate from everyday life. That actually ties in with some of Kaiwa's thoughts on something that you, as a podcast fan, might find pretty interesting.
Play. Hold on. Are you saying my podcast obsession is connected to ancient rituals somehow?
Well, maybe not directly, but Kaiwa says play, it's a lot like the sacred, actually. It exists outside of normal life. It has its own rules, its own sense of time. Think about it. When you're really into a game, lost in a book, or, yeah, even hooked on a good podcast, you're stepping outside your routine, leaving your worries behind. You're entering a world with its own logic, its own rhythm.
That's so true. I completely lose track of time when I'm listening to a good podcast. It's like my brain goes somewhere else entirely. But is play really as meaningless as Kiowa makes it sound? It doesn't feel meaningless, you
Yeah,
know?
that's a really good point. And that's maybe where we challenge Kaiwa a little bit. Does play really have zero impact on the real world?
Mm.
Or could it be that play, in its own way, connects us to something bigger? Maybe it even helps us make sense of all the chaos around us.
Right, like those aha moments you get from a great story or that feeling of flow when you're totally absorbed in something. Those experiences can be really powerful, even life-changing. But this whole conversation, it actually leads to a pretty sobering thought from Kaiwa. He compares festivals to war.
Yeah, he says that in modern society, war has kind of taken on the role that festivals used to play in older cultures. Because of how total and intense it is, war disrupts everyday life like almost nothing else can.
You're saying that the massive mobilization, the constant news, that feeling that everything's on the line, that's like a modern day festival, but with incredibly high stakes, with awful consequences.
Exactly. It's a disturbing thought, but that's what Kaiwa is getting at. He's suggesting that war, as horrible as it is, might actually tap into this primal need that humans have for disruption, for a break from the ordinary. And in our world, with fewer and fewer traditional festivals, maybe that need isn't being met in other ways.
It's a lot to think about. This whole conversation has me wondering, even with all our technology, are we still searching for the same things those ancient cultures were looking for in their rituals and festivals?
What Kaiwa really highlights is that even as societies change, humans are still fascinated by the sacred. That search for meaning, for something beyond the everyday, it doesn't go away. It just takes on different forms.
So instead of temples and sacrifices, we have things like art, music, even those really immersive experiences you get from a great movie or video game. Those are our modern sacred spaces.
Maybe. Think about those moments when a piece of music just completely captivates you or you get lost in a movie's world. Time disappears, you forget your worries, and you feel connected to something larger than yourself.
That feeling of awe, of transcendence, it's not that different from what those ancient cultures were after, is it?
Not at all. And maybe that's the biggest takeaway from this deep dive into man and the sacred. That search for meaning, for connection, for something more than just the mundane. It's universal. It's part of who we are as humans.
It's almost like we're hardwired for it, you know? To
Yeah.
want more than just the everyday, to look for that awe, that wonder.
And maybe, just maybe, that's what the sacred really is at its core. That thing that reminds us we're part of something bigger, something beyond ourselves.
Makes you think about what those sacred spaces look like for us today, doesn't it? Those experiences that give us that feeling.
It really does. And it's probably different for everyone, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like for some people, it might be connecting with nature. That feeling you get looking up at a sky full of stars, or the peace of being in a forest.
Or even just those moments of quiet reflection, that can feel really sacred too.
Totally.
Yeah.
And for some people, it's that feeling of belonging you get from sharing a meal with loved ones,
Right.
you know, or helping others.
Right, giving back. And, for some, it's getting lost in something creative, like an artist in the zone or a musician pouring their heart into their music.
Exactly. It's that total absorption, that flow state.
What I'm really taking away from this whole conversation is that the sacred, it's not just about those ancient rituals or old temples. It's something that's still alive in us. It's here in our everyday lives waiting to be discovered.
I love that. And honestly, that might be the most hopeful, the most empowering message that Caillois gives us. This search for meaning, for something more. It's not just for, mystics or whoever. It's a journey we can all go on, each in our own way.
So as you're going about your day, just think about this for a minute. What feels sacred to you? What are those things, those experiences that lift you out of the ordinary, even just for a little bit? What makes you feel connected to something bigger?
It's about finding those moments, right?
It really is.
Hmm.
And holding on to them, because those are the things that really stay with us. They remind us what it means to be human.
Beautifully said.